C.S. Lewis says somewhere in his book Miracles, bemoaning the fact that the modern world is uprooted from its tradition, from authority, from the past, from the wisdom of the sages, for the first time in history. He says, perhaps divine providence is carrying out a daring experiment, namely allowing Western civilization to deny its roots, to deny authority, to deny the sages, to ignore this, so that each individual becomes a sage. So that no one can say, well, the sages are up there, I don't have to be a sage. We don't have any sages anymore, so you have to be one. That's a daring experiment. Because if it does work, you have the best of all possible civilizations. And if it doesn't work, you have the worst. Why the worst? Because you have the abolition of man. The consequence of moral egalitarianism is the abolition of the whole moral order and therefore of the human conscience. David Riesman, in The Lonely Crowd, a sociological classic written sometime in the 50s, says that in a traditional society, a pre-modern society, people get their meaning of life from the sages, from the social order, from the authorities. That type of person is called the tradition-directed person. And in some of these societies, for instance, ancient Greece, individuals arise which question the social order, like Socrates. And of course, they always get into trouble. But they don't question truth or authority. They rather say, I have to find this for myself. I can't just inherit it from the ancestors or from the authorities. And this type of person is called, what he says, the inner-directed person. And always the inner-directed person has an ambivalent relationship with the other with the tradition-directed person. Socrates, for one, did not fundamentally deny his tradition. He just wanted to erect better foundations under it, more reasonable foundations. Then around the time of the Renaissance, says Riesman, the idea became popular that the inner-directed person is superior to the tradition-directed person, and we all ought to be inner-directed persons. And wouldn't it be nice if you had a society of Socrateses? Well, there's two ways to do this, the hard way and the easy way. The hard way is education. Make everybody a Socrates. That's hard. Much easier way. Deny the authority of tradition. So there's no other option. Everybody's got to have meaning. Nobody can live without meaning and values. If you don't get values from other people, but who mediate the ancestors or the divine authorities, then you got to get it from yourself. So by denying the authority of tradition will necessarily produce a society of people who have to be inner-directed. So began, says Riesman, the demolition of authority structures. And it didn't work. It didn't work because sheep without shepherds are still sheep. But they need meaning somewhere. Well, they've denied the vertical, and they can't make the interior, so they find a third source of meaning. And Riesman marvels at the fact that a new type of mind and a new type of conscience emerges in the modern world, which he calls the other-directed person. They look to other people, to fads and fashions, to what's popular, for their meaning and values. And the other-directed person, he says, is more of a conformist than the tradition-directed person. Because the tradition-directed person sees society simply as a mail carrier. The authority is not in other people. The authority is in God or the meaning of life, the ancestors, Platonic forms, the will of the gods, whatever. Some supreme authority which you can't directly touch, which is mediated by those other people whom you do directly touch. But the other-directed person denies that whole vertical dimension. So imagine a bunch of sheep lacking a shepherd and needing direction, and they're wandering around in a circle, each one with his nose to the tail of the sheep in front of him. That's the image of the other-directed society, a society of conformists. The very concept of honor illustrates that. In all ancient societies, people were honored for being superior, better in some way than others. Today, you're honored for not being superior, for being one of the crowd. Yet, though everything I've said about the necessity of aristocracy is true, we have to also make the case for a necessary egalitarian dimension of any good society. Any civil law, whether it comes from the king or the aristocracy or the people by elected representatives or even the people directly, any civil law has to be egalitarian because it has to deal, first of all, with basic human rights which come from our essence. Furthermore, every civil law has to be minimal rather than maximal. It can't require heroic virtue. It must set minimum limits. Its purpose is not to make saints. Its purpose is to protect the weak against the strong, a protection of equal rights against evil. So as I said in my last lecture, you people and judges and policemen, you're not saint makers, you're garbage men. But that's necessary too. Viktor Frankl, in Man's Search for Meaning, one of the great books of the 20th century, best book to come out of World War II, I think, suggests that it would be a nice idea if we could balance things in America. He says we have a deep consciousness of rights, but not of responsibilities. So there ought to be a statue in San Francisco Bay which balances the Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor. But what kind of rights do we have? We have rights over against the state and duties and responsibilities over against other people, but we don't, first of all, have rights over against other people or duties to the state. That would be more totalitarian. I said I was going to give you a concrete political suggestion. All right, I'll end with something concrete.